All right, Florida State takes on Boston College on Monday night, and it's the fourth year in a row where they are one of the featured Labor Day games that doesn't take place on a Saturday. And I think it's happened every single year that they've been one of the featured college football games of opening weekend outside of 2019 and 2020, which were kind of weird years. 2019, you had the hurricane. 2020 was the COVID year. But every year they continue to be primetime Noles, and that will probably happen again next year with Alabama opening the schedule. But most importantly, we went on some pretty long rants about the Georgia Tech game, and I think that it is finally time to turn the page from Georgia Tech to Boston College. Now, we know all about that game, and if you want to go back and watch me rant about it, or watch me maybe not rant so much, but just kind of get into the weeds on what issues were, you can go check out those videos on our page. But this Boston College game is pretty intriguing and maybe even dangerous from a couple of different aspects, and we want to talk about that today in our video presented by BetUS. Castellanos is the very first piece that you have to look at if you're considering Boston College, and a kid who really played well against you last year in moments, in parts of the game. Now, we will remember Florida State was up 31-10 and had a chance to really put a stranglehold on the game and finish it off and close it out. And due to a fumble six or just a weird set of circumstances and events, Boston College made that game a lot closer. And it has Florida State fans kind of thinking back like, well, if you can drop to Georgia Tech and you barely beat BC last year, what is going to happen this year? I do want to take you back just a little bit. Florida State was a 24-point favorite in this BC game before they played in Dublin against Georgia Tech. Now, we all know what happened against Georgia Tech. There's no reason to relive that pain or that drama. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I did recently see a Josh Pate video saying that he reached out to a sports book. We won't mention him by name because BetUS is taking care of us here. But we did hear that he reached out to a sports book to see what a hypothetical line for Florida State Georgia Tech would be if they played this week. And they said on a neutral site field, Florida State would be still a 7.5-point favorite. Now, that may not make sense to you. You may not be super familiar with what betting means. But even though Florida State lost to Georgia Tech, Vegas says, well, on a neutral site field, if you line the two teams up, we're going to take Florida State to win by about a touchdown, maybe just a smidge more than a touchdown, because we think a lot of things maybe went wrong in that Georgia Tech game. Maybe Florida State would play a little better. Maybe Georgia Tech wouldn't execute perfectly like they did. And so we'd still favor the Noles. But then the line comes out for BC, and it comes out at minus 17, meaning the Florida State Seminoles are a 17-point favorite. Now, it's been bet down to 16, but for the purpose of the video, we had a lot of people asking about what this meant. It means essentially that if Florida State is supposed to win by 17, if you bet on the Noles and they win by 18, you win. If you bet on BC and Florida State wins by 15 or less or loses the game outright, then you win. Obviously, Florida State and Boston College not created equally, and so point spreads are designed to kind of even the teams out. Well, of course, Florida State's supposed to win the game, but they're not only supposed to win, but they need to win by a significant amount to make it a little bit more even and get money on both sides of the line. So that's why they're a 16 or 17-point favorite here. Now that you've had your crash course in betting, people immediately hit me up asking me about that line. After losing to Georgia Tech and getting pretty shell-shocked, could the Noles really win by 3 scores against another team with a running quarterback? And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this game is a lock or that this game is sealed up or that there's no chance the Noles could lose, but I will tell you why I think that spread is still so high. Now, I'm going to talk about these points, but if you want to go over to betus.com right now and bet on this, you can do that at the link in my description, which will give you a 125% deposit match. That's up to your first 3 deposits, up to $2,000. Now, BetUS is super easy to use. They've got great customer service. Go check them out if I convince you by any means that you should go bet this line one way or another. Now, here's why I think that this line is still pretty high and still very much favors the Noles. At the end of the day, Georgia Tech was frustrating, but that does not escape. Like the fact is not lost that Florida State still has way, way more talent than BC. Now, is Florida State going to play soft again? Are they going to play slow again? Is DJ going to be indecisive again? Is Norvell going to coach timid again? All those things are very valid questions. But at the end of the day, Vegas cannot necessarily project, especially after just one game in a foreign country, that all those things are going to happen again. Over the course of their careers, we've seen DJ play better than he did on Saturday. We've seen Mike Norvell coach better than he did on Saturday. We've seen this offense and defensive line, the talent that's on them, play better than they did on Saturday. And so the thought from Vegas would be, well, do we just look at how they played one time, or do we look at what these players and coaches have done for the length of their career? And Vegas is certainly going to look at what they've done for the length of their career. Florida State still has way more talent than BC. Georgia Tech is a way better team than Boston College. And that's no slight to Boston College. We'll do a full preview of them tomorrow night on Thursday night. So if you're watching this, make sure you hit subscribe so you can see me and Richie break down the game. But Georgia Tech is a better team than Boston College. They would probably, on a neutral site field, be about a touchdown or more favored, right? They're in a hypothetical scenario, they're about a touchdown dog to Florida State. In a hypothetical scenario, BC's about a 17-point dog to Florida State. Georgia Tech's maybe about 10 points better, according to Vegas there. Now, that's not transitive property, is not exactly linear. You might be more of a touchdown, but I think Georgia Tech, we would all agree, is a better team than BC, especially in year 2 of this Brent Key turnaround. Boston College comes in number 3 with a new staff and is playing their first game of the year. You saw how it benefited Florida State to have that Duquesne game against LSU a couple of years ago. I think as bad as the Georgia Tech game made us feel, it certainly is going to be good for the Noles to have already had experience playing this year, to know what to correct, to know what to fix, to know what the staff needs to put a Band-Aid or duct tape or, barbed wire, whatever on to get a little bit more production out of the team. It would be shocking to me if Florida State didn't play this game better just from the simple fact of being able to be coached up to their issues in week 0, right? I don't think I'm going on too far of a limb to say that even though the result didn't go our way, it was helpful for us to play a game and Boston College be sitting not knowing, what it feels like to go up against other competition. I would imagine that Florida State's not a step slow anymore. I'd imagine that they have corrected some mistakes. And I'm not saying they're going to come out and play a perfect game, but it certainly helps that this is BC's staff's first time ever playing with these guys, coaching these guys, and Florida State, an established program that already has a game under their belt this year, will certainly help. I also don't think that BC matches up with Florida State the way that Georgia Tech did. Georgia Tech wanted to take advantage of Florida State being slow, methodical, waiting on the in-helmet communications, running the ball a ton. Florida State ran the ball a ton. Georgia Tech ran the ball a ton. We thought that we'd be able to have success not only running the ball, but stopping the ball. Obviously, we couldn't do either one of those. We couldn't run it. We couldn't stop it. And that played right into what Georgia Tech wanted to do. I don't think that BC matches up the same way. I think they're looking a little bit more big play with Castellanos, and they're trying to, if he scrambles and gets 40 yards, well, that's going to help extend the clock out itself, because Georgia Tech was more so dink and dunk, take 5-6 yards here, take 7 yards here, take 10 yards here, whereas they move the ball down the field. I think BC's going a little bit more big play. Obviously, playing at home is a big deal. That's 3 points right there, right? If this game was on neutral site, you're probably looking at about a 2-touchdown favorite as opposed to 17 points. I would expect Florida State to play better at home than they do at a neutral site. Now, again, was it that much of a neutral site? Obviously, that can be debated. Florida State certainly had more fans there. They were certainly louder there. They were certainly the better crowd there. But there's nothing like playing at home. There's nothing like going through your regular routines. There's nothing like the full crowd being behind you as opposed to just half. The advantages of not having to travel, the advantages of being around your entire staff are big. And so home field advantage is a big deal as well. What about this? Maybe not as considered as much. What about Vegas's liability? I talked to somebody about this the other day. Vegas opened this line up at minus 24. If they drop that line all the way down to what, minus 10, where do you think it should be, right? You think it should be minus 10? The Noles only about 10 points better than Boston College. You think it should be, Noles minus 27? I'm sorry, Noles minus just 7 or so, a touchdown. I think if you do that, Vegas opens themselves up a ton to people winning on both sides of the line. Hey, I bet Boston College weeks ago when it was plus 24. And then, of course, I think the Noles win by 7. And so I'm going to bet both sides of that line. And I'm going to win on both of them because the Noles probably aren't going to win by 24. And Boston College is probably not going to keep it within a touchdown. So I win on both sides of that line. Now, there's obviously the chance you could lose on both sides. That certainly exists. But your odds say that's not great for Vegas's liability. And so they set the line fairly close, just a touchdown difference when it came back out. Also, Vegas isn't dumb. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this isn't me sugarcoating the loss or putting any kind of silver lining on it. I'm still disgusted by the loss. It still shouldn't have happened. But I will say this. It was week 0. And the team can adjust from there. We talked about the coaches being able to put Band-Aids or duct tape or whatever on the team. But Florida State played horribly, right? We whined and complained for well over an hour and a half in the 2 videos that you put together, doing one right after the game and then one yesterday on our live show. Florida State played horribly. There's no doubt about that. They coached horribly. And they were still tied with what we consider to be an above-average Georgia Tech team with 5 seconds to go. Right? When you look at it from that perspective, I'm not justifying the loss or trying to take away from how bad it felt at all. But when you look at it from that perspective, Florida State played a pretty bad game. Would you call it C-? Would you call it D+? How would you rate it? I'm happy to hear in the comments. But whatever you'd say, D+, C-, C even, it would probably be the best I could think to go. When you look at that, they played like a C-, D+ type game, and they were they were tied with 5 seconds to go. I mean, it probably shows you that Florida State's talent really is legit. Now, they didn't play up to it. They didn't play well enough to even come, close to, they weren't the ones with the ball with 5 seconds to go with a chance to win it. But they played pretty bad, and they still were like right there. What if they fall in one of those fumbles, right? And I know I'm not going to play the what-if game. They were this close. Oh, guys, we almost did it. Like, boom, rah-rah, the troops. No, I'm not trying to do any of that. They played terribly, and they deserve to lose. But what if they fall in one of those fumbles? What if they fall in that fumble that's down around the 40, right, with 55 seconds left? Now, Haynes King falls on it. Georgia Tech gets it back. But what if Florida State falls on that thing? What if it bounces weird and the Noles get it? Well, they've got 55 seconds to go, 20 yards? And DJ had just proved to you that he could drive you on 4th down a couple of times. They got to go 20 yards, and then you get a Fitzgerald kick for the win? What if they fall on the fumble that happened before that, where DJ Lundy tried to pick it up instead of just falling on it? Do the Noles then end up winning at that point? They take the lead instead of Georgia Tech. They go up 21-14, and they're the ones that get the ball last. What if they get one stop? What if they get a stop on that 3rd and 19? What if the kid misses the field goal? They were this close, right? And in playing terribly, they were still extremely close. Now, it should have never been that close. I agree with that. It should have never come down to that. But one thing kind of goes your way, and you win the game, right? And I think Vegas sees that too. Now, you win by 30, you lose by 30 or you lose by 3. It doesn't matter. The sting is the same. You got beat, right? You went all the way to Dublin and you got beat. So for us, it doesn't matter. But Vegas does see those little things. Vegas sees, okay, Florida State fans feel awful right now, and they should, right? You shouldn't have lost this game. But as bad as they played, they still were right there. They were still right in it. And again, that's not me sugarcoating the loss. That's me telling you why Vegas is keeping this line as big as it is. Because they know that Florida State's talent is eventually going to click on. Now, for Florida State, does that happen this week? Does that happen next week? Does that happen the week after? Does that happen the week after? Does that happen against Clemson? Does that happen when you're down the road against Miami or Notre Dame? Does it never happen? Eventually, you'd think, though, it does click on. And the talent eventually plays up to itself, and Florida State turns things around. And Vegas is telling you that could happen this week. It may not. It may be after the bye. It may be later. But Vegas is telling you there's a pretty good chance that Florida State's talent eventually clicks on and they get rolling. It doesn't make the Georgia Tech loss feel any better. It doesn't make dropping that game in Dublin feel any better. But I think Vegas is kind of telling you, no, we still expect the Noles to be pretty good. We still expect the Noles to dominate most of the teams on their schedule. It would surprise me if Florida State's not a decent favorite in their next 4 games. Boston College, Memphis, Cal, and SMU. I know SMU's on the road. That's one that I want to see how they play the next 3 weeks. But as of right now, Florida State would be a favorite in all 3. They're still a favorite when you look at what things look like for down the road against Florida. I think I've seen that around 6.5, 7 points. They're a 1 point underdog against Miami right now in a lot of sports books that I've seen. I've seen it down to be like Clemson's a 1 point favorite or Florida State's a 1 point favorite in that Clemson matchup. So things haven't really shifted that much. Vegas is still telling you like we expect Florida State to be in most games, to win most games, and we'll see kind of how the cards shake out. Now you got to go perform, right? This is not necessarily the video telling me where I'm telling you like, oh, go bet your house on the Noles minus 17, 16, whatever bet US has it as. But I do think that Vegas is trying to hint to you that maybe Saturday was a little bit more of a fluke. Maybe we'll see a little bit different team in Doak Campbell. I expect that we'll see a little bit different team in Doak Campbell. And so for my money, I'm probably leaning toward taking the Noles in the points. I know it's a lot of points, especially after seeing your team blow it, but I do think the Noles play better. We'll break all of that down on Thursday night's preview show. If you missed any of me ranting about the loss, being upset, not really being in a great mood, not thrilled, you can click either video on the screen right now to check those two out. One was from right after the game, and then the other was from yesterday's morning show. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate BetUS for their support. We'll talk to you soon. Go Noles.